never imagined my little boy would have to stand in front of a judge. He looks so small, so fragile. I really hope justice will finally be on his side. But when the verdict came, my heart shattered. The court ruled against my child, against fairness, against the truth.
I never imagined my little boy would have to stand in front of a judge. He looked so small, so fragile, but full of hope that justice would finally be on his side. But when the verdict came, my heart shattered. The court ruled against my child, against fairness, against the truth. That day, I realized the system failed him, and the injustice he suffered is something the world must know. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and this is the story of how my 8-year-old son, Ethan, became the center of a legal battle that would expose the darkest corners of institutional negligence. It started on a Tuesday morning in September, the kind of morning that feels ordinary until it becomes the dividing line between before and after. Ethan had always been a bright kid. Teachers loved him. He asked questions that made adults pause and think. He was curious, kind, and trusting, maybe too trusting. That morning, he came home from Riverside Elementary School with a bruise on his arm. Not a small one. It wrapped around his bicep like a dark purple bracelet, each finger mark visible and distinct. "What happened, honey?" I asked, kneeling to his level, my heart already racing. He looked at the floor. Mr. Patterson got mad. Mr. Patterson, the gym teacher, the one who'd been at Riverside for 15 years, the one parents called tough but fair, the one I'd never questioned before. "Did he hurt you?" My voice was shaking. Ethan nodded, tears pooling in his eyes. He grabbed me really hard. I was talking during roll call, and he said I needed to learn respect. I felt my blood turn to ice. This wasn't discipline. This was assault. I took photos immediately, documented everything he said, and called the school. The principal, Mrs. Henderson, assured me she would look into it. She sounded concerned but not alarmed. That should have been my first warning sign. 2 days later, I received a call. Mrs. Henderson's tone had changed completely. "Mrs. Mitchell, we've completed our internal investigation. Mr. Patterson denies any inappropriate contact with your son. Ethan has been known to be ... imaginative. We believe this is a misunderstanding." Imaginative. The word hung in the air like poison. They were calling my child a liar. "I have photographs," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. "There are bruises in the shape of adult fingers on my son's arm." "Children bruise easily," she replied smoothly. "They play rough. We found no evidence of wrongdoing." That's when I knew. They were protecting the teacher, not my child. I hung up and immediately called a lawyer. Attorney David Reeves listened to my story in his cluttered office downtown. He was in his 50s with kind eyes that had seen too much injustice. When I showed him the photos, he sat back in his chair and sighed deep. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'll be honest with you. These cases are incredibly difficult. Schools have legal teams, teachers have unions, and an 8-year-old's testimony against a respected educator, it's an uphill battle. So what are you saying? I should just let this go?" "I'm saying you need to prepare yourself. This won't be easy, and the school will fight back hard. But if you're willing to stand up for your son, I'll stand with you." I didn't hesitate. "I'm willing." We filed a civil lawsuit against both Mr. Patterson and Riverside Elementary School 3 weeks later. The local newspaper picked up the story. That's when everything changed. Not in the way I hoped, but in ways I could never have imagined. Our quiet suburban life became a battlefield. Anonymous messages started flooding my phone. "You're ruining a good man's life. Your kid is probably lying for attention." Some parents will do anything for money. The school community turned against us. Other parents stopped talking to me at pickup. Ethan's friends were told they couldn't play with him anymore. But I pressed forward, because when I looked at my son's face, at the confusion and hurt in his eyes, I knew I couldn't stop. Not for anything. The depositions began in November, 2 months after we filed the lawsuit. The school district hired Morrison and Fletcher, one of the most expensive law firms in the state. Their lead attorney, Rebecca Morrison, was known for defending institutions and winning. She was sharp, relentless, and, as I would soon discover, willing to use any tactic necessary. Ethan's deposition was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon. David warned me it would be difficult, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened in that room. Rebecca sat across from my son, her expression pleasant but calculating. She started gently. Ethan, do you know what it means to tell the truth? Yes, ma'am. It means not lying. Good. And do you always tell the truth? I try to. You try to. She smiled. Can you tell me about a time when you didn't tell the truth? David objected immediately, but the question had already planted a seed. For the next 2 hours, Rebecca systematically dismantled my 8-year-old son. She twisted his words, confused him with complex questions, and made him doubt his own memory of that day. Are you sure Mr. Patterson grabbed you? Could someone else have done it? It was him. I remember. But you also said you were talking to your friend Daniel during roll call. Were you paying attention to who was near? I think so. You think so? So you're not completely sure? I watched my son's confidence crumble. His small voice grew quieter. He started second-guessing himself. When we left that office, Ethan looked at me with tear-stained cheeks and asked, Mommy, did I do something wrong? That night, I held him while he cried. I told him he was brave, that he was telling the truth, that justice would prevail. But inside, I was terrified. If they could make an 8-year-old doubt himself in a deposition, what would they do in court? The community backlash intensified. Our story had spread beyond the local newspaper. A regional news station ran a segment titled, Small Town Divided, Teacher Accused of Abuse. They interviewed Mr. Patterson, who appeared on camera looking wounded and betrayed. I've dedicated 15 years to these children, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I've never raised a hand to anyone. This accusation has destroyed my reputation, my career, everything I've worked for. I just want my life back. The comments section exploded. Thousands of people who'd never met Eden, who'd never seen the bruises, who knew nothing about what happened that day, declared my son a liar, and me a vindictive mother seeking attention. But then something unexpected happened. You know, it's fascinating how these stories unfold in different places across America. Small towns, big cities, each has its own way of dealing with injustice. I'm curious. Where do you think a story like this could happen? What city comes to mind when you hear about a community closing ranks to protect its own? Drop the name in the comments below. 3 days after the news segment aired, I received an email from an unknown address. The subject line read, You're not alone. I opened it hesitantly. Mrs. Mitchell, my name is Jennifer Caldwell. 7 years ago, Mr. Patterson hurt my daughter in the same way. I reported it to the school, but nothing was done. They told me she was being dramatic. Eventually, we moved away because the community made our lives unbearable. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder. I'm sorry I let him continue teaching. But if you're still fighting, I want to help. I have documentation. I have photos. And I have my daughter who's now 15 and ready to tell her story. I read the email 3 times, tears streaming down my face. We weren't alone. This wasn't an isolated incident. Mr. Patterson had done this before, and the school had covered it up. I immediately forwarded the email to David. He called me within minutes, his voice charged with renewed energy. Sarah, this changes everything. If we can prove a pattern of behavior and institutional cover-up, we have a real case. But we need to move carefully. They'll fight this with everything they have. Let them fight, I said. We're not backing down. Over the next 3 weeks, Jennifer and I spoke almost daily. She sent me her daughter's medical records from 7 years ago, showing bruises in the same location as she shared emails she'd sent to Mrs. Henderson, who had been vice principal at the time, documenting her complaints. Most importantly, her daughter, Amanda, agreed to testify. The preliminary hearing was set for January 14th in the county courthouse downtown. I'd never been inside a courtroom before. The high ceilings, dark wood paneling, and the American flag hanging behind the judge's bench all felt imposing, designed to intimidate. Ethan sat beside me, wearing his best button-up shirt, his small hand gripping mine tightly. Judge Margaret Thornton entered the courtroom, her expression neutral and unreadable. She was in her 60s, with steel gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. David had told me she was known as a fair judge, but also one who didn't tolerate emotional appeal. She wanted facts, evidence, and legal precision. The hearing began with opening statement. Rebecca Morrison stood first, her voice calm and authoritative. Your Honor, this case is a tragedy, not because of what Mr. Patterson allegedly did, but because a good man's life and career are being destroyed by unsubstantiated accusations from a child. Children misremember. They exaggerate. Sometimes they're coached by well-meaning but misguided parents. The defense will show that no abuse occurred, that Mr. Patterson acted appropriately within his role as an educator, and that this lawsuit is without merit. David stood next. Your Honor, this case is indeed a tragedy. The tragedy of a child who was physically assaulted by a trusted authority figure and then called a liar when he sought justice. The evidence will show clear bruising consistent with adult grip marks. We will present a pattern of similar behavior by Mr. Patterson that the school district deliberately ignored. This isn't about a child's imagination. This is about institutional negligence and the protection of an abuser. Judge Thornton looked down at the file before her. I've reviewed the initial evidence. Mr. Reeves, you're asking the court to allow testimony from a witness regarding an incident that occurred 7 years ago. The defense has objected to this as prejudicial and irrelevant. I'd like to hear your argument for why this testimony should be admitted. David approached the bench. Your Honor, evidence of prior bad acts is admissible when it demonstrates a pattern of behavior. Amanda Caldwell's testimony will show that Mr. Patterson has engaged in this conduct before, that the school was notified, and that they took no action. This establishes both motive and knowledge on the part of the school district, which is essential to our case. Rebecca countered immediately. Your Honor, Ms. Caldwell's allegations were never proven. No charges were filed, no disciplinary action was taken because there was no evidence of wrongdoing. Allowing this testimony would be highly prejudicial to my client and would confuse the issues before the court. Judge Thornton was silent for a long moment. Then she spoke. I'll allow the testimony, but with limitation. Ms. Caldwell may testify to the facts of her allegations and the school's response, but I will not permit speculation about Mr. Patterson's character or intent. The jury will be instructed on the proper use of this evidence. We'll proceed. Rebecca's jaw tightened, but she nodded. I felt a small surge of hope. We'd won the first battle. Over the next several days, David presented our case meticulously. He called Dr. Michelle Torres, a pediatrician who specialized in child abuse cases. She examined the photographs of Ethan's bruises and testified that they were absolutely consistent with forceful grabbing by an adult hand. In my 20 years of practice, Dr. Torres said, I've seen hundreds of cases of child abuse. These marks are not from normal play or accidental injury. The pattern is too distinct, too specific. A child cannot create these bruises on themselves. Rebecca's cross-examination was brutal. Dr. Torres, isn't it true that bruising patterns can vary widely depending on skin type, activity level, and individual physiology? Yes, and isn't it possible that these bruises could have occurred from something other than Mr. Patterson grabbing the child? It's possible, but unlikely given. Just answer yes or no. Is it possible? Dr. Torres hesitated. Yes, it's possible. I watched the jury's faces. Some were nodding, others looked skeptical. Rebecca had created doubt, and doubt was all she needed. Next, David called Amanda Caldwell to the stand. She was 15 now, tall and poised, but I could see the nervousness in the way she twisted her hands. She took the oath and sat down, her eyes finding her mother in the back of the courtroom. Amanda, David began gently, can you tell us what happened to you 7 years ago at Riverside Elementary? Amanda took a deep breath, her voice steady despite the obvious emotion beneath it. I was in 3rd grade. Mr. Patterson was my gym teacher. One day we were playing dodgeball, and I accidentally hit another student in the face with the ball. It wasn't on purpose. The game is literally about throwing balls at people. But the other kids started crying. What happened next? David prompted. Mr. Patterson came over. He was really angry. He yelled at me in front of everyone, called me careless and disrespectful. Then he grabbed my arm and dragged me to the side of the gym. He squeezed so hard I started crying. When I got home, there were bruises. My mom took pictures and went to the school. What did the school do? Nothing. The principal said Mr. Patterson was just trying to remove me from the situation, that he didn't mean to hurt me. They said I was being too sensitive. Some of the other parents found out and they ... They said my mom was trying to get Mr. Patterson in trouble for no reason. Eventually, we moved to a different town. Rebecca's cross-examination was predictably harsh. Ms. Caldwell, you were 8 years old when this allegedly happened. How can you be sure your memory is accurate? Because I have nightmares about it, Amanda said quietly. Because I still flinch when people grab my arm. Because I remember exactly how it felt. But memories can be influenced, can't they? Especially over 7 years. Isn't it possible your mother's interpretation of events has shaped your memory? My mom didn't tell me what to remember. I know what happened to me. You know what you think happened. But you were a child. Children misinterpret things. I didn't misinterpret bruises on my arm, Amanda shot back, her voice rising. I didn't misinterpret being hurt by a teacher who was supposed to protect me. Judge Thornton intervened. Miss Morrison, move on. Despite the powerful testimony, I could feel the tide shifting. The jury looked tired, overwhelmed by technical arguments and competing narratives. This wasn't about truth anymore. It was about who could argue more convincingly. Then David called his final witness, Ethan. My son walked to the stand, his small frame dwarfed by the witness box. The bailiff had to adjust the microphone downward so he could reach it. Judge Thornton spoke to him gently. Ethan, do you understand that you need to tell the truth? Yes, ma'am. Good. Answer the questions as best as you can, okay? David approached slowly, his expression kind. Ethan, can you tell us what happened on September 15th during gym class? Ethan's voice was small, but clear. We were sitting on the floor for roll call. I was whispering to my friend Daniel about a video game. Mr. Patterson called my name and I didn't answer right away because I wasn't paying attention. He got really mad. He came over and grabbed my arm and pulled me up. It hurt really bad. He squeezed really hard and said I needed to learn respect. What did you do? I said I was sorry. I tried not to cry because I didn't want the other kids to make fun of me, but it really hurt. Did you tell anyone? I told my mom when I got home. She saw the bruises and took pictures. Rebecca's cross-examination made me want to scream. She approached Ethan with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Ethan, you like video games, right? Yes, ma'am. Do you ever play games where you're the hero fighting bad guys? Sometimes. And in those games, is there usually a villain? Someone who's mean and does bad things? David objected. Your Honor? Relevance? I'm establishing the witness's understanding of narrative structure, Your Honor. It goes to credibility. Judge Thornton allowed it. Ethan, Rebecca continued, when you told your mom what happened, did she seem upset? Yes, she was really worried, and you love your mom, don't you? You'd want to make her feel better? I guess so. So isn't it possible that you exaggerated what happened just a little bit to explain the bruise? Maybe you fell during gym class and didn't want to admit it, so you made up a story about Mr. Patterson. No, Ethan said firmly. That's not what happened. But the damage was done. The trial recessed for a week after Ethan's testimony. Those 7 days felt like 7 years. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't think about anything except the way Rebecca Morrison had made my son look like a liar in front of a jury. Every time I closed my eye, I saw Ethan's small face crumpling under her cross-examination. We need more, David said during one of our many phone calls. Rebecca's going to bring character witnesses for Patterson parents, former students, colleagues. We need to show the jury who this man really is, not just the image he's built over 15 years. How do we do that? I asked, exhausted. We dig deeper. There have to be others. People who were too afraid to come forward, who thought they were alone. We need to find them. I posted on social media, carefully worded to avoid defamation claims. If you or your child had a negative experience with a teacher at Riverside Elementary and felt your concerns weren't taken seriously, please contact me privately. You're not alone. Within 48 hours, I had 17 messages. Not all were relevant. Some were complaints about grading or teaching style, but 3 stood out. 3 separate families spanning different years, describing eerily similar incidents with Mr. Patterson, physical grabbing, bruises, school officials dismissing concerns, community backlash for speaking up. One mother, Rosa Mendoza, wrote, "My son Carlos was terrified of gym class. He begged me not to make him go. When I finally got him to tell me why, he said Mr. Patterson grabbed him by the shoulders and shook him for not running fast enough during laps. I complained to Mrs. Henderson. She said Carlos needed to toughen up, that gym class was meant to be physically challenging. I'm a single mom, I work 2 jobs, I couldn't fight the school system. I'm so ashamed I didn't do more. Another father, Kevin Travers, sent photos of his daughter's wrist from 4 years ago. Lily told me Mr. Patterson grabbed her during a basketball game. I went to the school. They said she was being dramatic. Other parents called me a troublemaker. I dropped it because I didn't want Lily to be ostracized. I've regretted it every day since. David subpoenaed school records, looking for any documentation complaints against Mr. Patterson. What we found was worse than we imagined. Over 15 years. There had been 9 formal complaints filed by parents. 9. Each one had been investigated internally and dismissed. Each one was accompanied by notes describing the parents as overreactive, misunderstanding proper disciplinary measures, or seeking attention. The school district had created a paper trail that protected the one institution and the teacher, while silencing the victims. When the trial resumed, David presented this evidence methodically. He called Rosa Mendoza to the stand. Her testimony was devastating. "I failed my son," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I let them convince me I was wrong, that I was overreacting, but I see Ethan now, and I see Carlos 4 years ago, and I know we were right. Something is deeply wrong at that school." Rebecca tried to discredit her. "Mrs. Mendoza, you never filed a police report, did you?" "No, ma'am. You never took your son to a doctor to document injuries." "No. I couldn't afford to miss work, and the school said it wasn't necessary." "So we only have your word that any of this happened?" "Yes," Rosa said quietly. "Just like we only had our children's word." And that wasn't enough for anyone to listen. Kevin Travers testified next, bringing the photographs of his daughter's bruised wrist. Then David presented the school records, page after page of dismissed complaints, each one following the same pattern. Parent reports incident, school investigates, school finds no wrongdoing, parent is discouraged from pursuing the matter further. Judge Thornton examined the documents carefully, her expression growing darker with each page. When she looked up at the school district's attorney, there was something new in her eyes. Anger. "The court is troubled by these records," she said. "Deeply troubled. We'll continue tomorrow with closing arguments." That night, the story exploded. A journalist from the state capitol who'd been following the trial wrote an article titled, "How Many Children Have to Be Hurt Before We Listen?" It was shared thousands of times across social media. Parents across the state started sharing their own stories of dismissed complaints, of schools protecting teachers over students, of children who learned that speaking up meant being called a liar. The courthouse was packed for closing arguments. News vans lined the street outside. Protesters held signs, "Believe children and justice for Ethan." Counter-protesters held signs too, "Innocent until proven," "Guilty and stop the witch hunt." The case had become bigger than us, bigger than Riverside Elementary. It had become a flashpoint in a national conversation about institutional accountability. Rebecca Morrison stood first for the defense's closing argument. She was polished, confident, and devastatingly effective. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "this case is built on a foundation of emotion, not evidence. We all feel for Ethan Mitchell. We all want to protect children. But wanting something to be true doesn't make it true. The prosecution has presented you with allegations, with bruises that could have come from anywhere, with testimony from people who have admitted they can't be completely certain of their memories. They've tried to turn this into a story about institutional conspiracy, but the truth is much simpler. Accidents happen, children get hurt during play, and sometimes parents see malice where there is only misfortune." She paced in front of the jury box. "Mr. Patterson has dedicated 15 years of his life to educating children. Hundreds of students have passed through his classroom. Hundreds of parents have trusted him with their children. Are we really supposed to believe that he's secretly been abusing children all this time, and only a handful of people know? Or is it more likely that gym class is a physical environment where children sometimes get bumped, grabbed, and bruised in the normal course of athletic activity?" She paused for effect. "The prosecution wants you to believe their narrative because it's emotionally satisfying. Good versus evil. David versus Goliath. But this isn't a movie. This is real life, where things are complicated and messy, where good people sometimes get accused of terrible things, where we have to rely on evidence, not emotion. And the evidence simply doesn't support the claim that Mr. Patterson deliberately harmed any child." It was a powerful closing. I could see several jurors nodding along. My chest tightened with fear. David stood for our closing argument. He didn't approach the jury immediately. Instead, he walked to where Ethan sat beside me and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "This," David said quietly, "is what we're really talking about. Not abstract legal theories. Not institutional policy. A child. A little boy who trusted an adult and was hurt. And when he tried to tell the truth about what happened, he was called a liar." He walked toward the jury, his voice growing stronger. "The defense wants you to believe this is about one incident, one bruise, one misunderstanding. But that's not what the evidence shows. The evidence shows a pattern spanning 15 years, 9 complaints, 9 dismissed investigations, 9 families who were told they were wrong, that their children were mistaken, that they were overreacting." David gestured toward the documents entered as evidence. "These records show something disturbing, a system designed to protect adults, not children." When Rosa Mendoza came forward about her son, the school didn't investigate Mr. Patterson. They investigated her, looking for reasons to dismiss her complaint. When Kevin Travers brought photographs of his daughter's bruised wrist, he was told she was being dramatic. When Jennifer Caldwell reported her daughter's injury 7 years ago, she was driven out of the community. His voice rose with controlled passion. "The defense is right about one thing. This case is about more than what happened to you. It's about whether we as a society value children's safety more than we value protecting institutions. It's about whether we believe children when they tell us they've been hurt. It's about whether we have the courage to hold powerful institutions accountable when they fail in their most basic duty, protecting the vulnerable." He turned back to that little boy. Didn't ask to be here. He didn't want to become the center of a media circus. He just wanted someone to believe. The school didn't. Many in his community didn't. Now it's up to you. 12 citizens who have the power to say, "We believe you, we see the truth, and we won't look away." The jury deliberated for 3 days. 3 agonizing days of waiting, hoping, praying. Each hour felt like an eternity. I couldn't focus on anything. The world had narrowed to this single question: would they believe my son? On the 3rd day of deliberation, my phone rang at 2:47 p.m. It was David. "The jury has reached a verdict. We need to be at the courthouse in 45 minutes. The drive downtown felt surreal, like moving through water. Ethan was at school. I'd tried to keep his routine as normal as possible during the trial. My mother had come to stay with us for support. She held my hand as we walked up the courthouse steps, past the protesters and journalists and cameras. Inside the courtroom, I took my seat beside David. Mr. Patterson sat at the defense table, his expression carefully neutral. Rebecca Morrison whispered something to him. The gallery was packed, standing room only. I recognized faces from the news coverage, from social media. People who had followed this case, who had picked sides, who were waiting to see if justice would prevail or fail. Judge Thornton entered. All rise. We stood, sat, waited. The tension was suffocating. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Thornton asked. The jury foreman, a middle-aged man with glasses and a serious expression, stood. "We have, Your Honor. What is your verdict on the count of assault against the minor, Ethan Mitchell?" Time seemed to stop. I couldn't breathe. Every muscle in my body was tensed, waiting for the words that would define everything. The foreman looked down at the paper. He took a breath. "We find the defendant, Robert Patterson, not guilty." The words hit me like a physical blow. Not guilty. Not guilty. The room erupted in noise, gasps, whispers, a few scattered cheers from Patterson's supporters. I heard nothing. I felt nothing except a vast, hollow emptiness. Not guilty. The foreman continued reading. There were more counts, more verdicts. On the count of negligence against Riverside Elementary School District, we find the defendant not guilty. Each not guilty was another knife in my heart. Judge Thornton banged her gavel for order. "The jury is dismissed with the court's thanks. Mr. Patterson, you are free to go." David put his hand on my arm. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. We'll appeal. This isn't over." But it felt over. It felt like the end of everything. I walked out of that courtroom in a daze. The journalists swarmed immediately, shoving microphones in my face. "Mrs. Mitchell, how do you respond to the verdict? Do you regret filing the lawsuit? What do you say to people who think your son lied?" David shielded me, pushing through the crowd to his car. He drove me home in silence. What was there to say? The system had failed. The jury hadn't believed my son. Justice, it turned out, was just a word. When I walked through my front door, Ethan was doing homework at the kitchen table. He looked up, saw my face, and knew immediately. We lost. His voice was so small. I knelt in front of him, taking his hands. Yes, baby. We lost. So ... They think I lied? No, honey. It's not about. But how do you explain to an 8-year-old that truth isn't enough? That sometimes people don't want to see what's right in front of them? That institutions protect themselves first and children second? I couldn't, so I just held him while he cried. That night, I sat in the darkness of my living room, staring at nothing. I thought about giving up, about moving away like Jennifer Caldwell had, like so many others before me, about trying to rebuild our lives somewhere the name Mitchell didn't carry the weight of accusations and controversy. My phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer. I'm so sorry. I know what this feels like. Call me if you need to talk. Then another message from an unknown number. I was on the jury. I wanted you to know that some of us believed your son. But 2 jurors absolutely refused to consider that a teacher could do this. We deliberated for 3 days, but they wouldn't budge. I'm sorry we failed Ethan. What happened to him was wrong. I read that message 3 times. Some of them had believed us, but it wasn't enough. I was about to put my phone down when it buzzed again. This time, it was an email notification. The subject line made my heart stop. The verdict was wrong, and I have proof. I opened the email with shaking hands. It was from Marcus Chun, a former physical education teacher who had worked at Riverside Elementary alongside Robert Patterson 5 years ago. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm writing because I can't stay silent anymore. I watched your trial on the news. I saw what happened, and I'm ashamed that I never came forward sooner. When I worked at Riverside, I witnessed Mr. Patterson become physically aggressive with students multiple times. I reported it to the administration. Mrs. Henderson told me that Mr. Patterson's firm approach was part of his style, and that parents appreciated having a peer who maintained discipline. When I pressed the issue, I was given a choice: drop it or find employment elsewhere. I was newly married, my wife was pregnant, and I couldn't afford to leave my job. So I transferred to another district and told myself it wasn't my problem anymore. I was wrong. I should have fought harder. If you're willing to pursue this further, I'll testify to what I saw. I have documentation of my complaint. I have dates, times, specific incidents. I know this comes too late for the trial, but maybe it's not too late for justice. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type a response. I forwarded the email to David immediately and called him. This changes everything, David said, his voice energized in a way I hadn't heard since before the verdict. If we can prove the school had direct knowledge from a staff member and still did nothing, we can file an appeal based on new evidence. We can also go to the state education board, maybe even the press. The press? I asked. David, we already lost. The story is over. People think Ethan lied. No, David said firmly. The story isn't over until we say it is. This email proves there was a deliberate cover-up at the institutional level. That's not just negligence, that's active concealment. With Marcus Chon's testimony, we can show that the school knew about Patterson's behavior and chose to protect him over students. Hope, dangerous and fragile, began to bloom in my chest. What do we do? First, I meet with Chun and get his full statement. Then we contact the state education board and request an investigation. And Sarah... we need to go public with this. Really public. The trial was local news, but this story needs to be national. People need to see how institutions protect themselves at children's expense. 3 days later, David and I sat across from Marcus Chun in a coffee shop downtown. He was in his early 30s, soft-spoken, with an earnest face that showed genuine remorse. I should have done this years ago, he said. I've been carrying this guilt since I left Riverside. When I saw the trial coverage, saw that little boy's picture, I couldn't sleep anymore. My wife finally said, Marcus, if you don't do something, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. He pulled out a folder containing printed emails, incident reports he'd filed with the administration, and a journal where he'd documented specific incidents. October 12, 2019, he read. Patterson grabbed a 5th grader by the back of the neck and forced him to do push-ups as punishment for talking during drills. The kid was in tears. I intervened, told Patterson that wasn't appropriate. He said I was too soft. that kids today needed stronger discipline. November 3, 2019, Patterson yanked a girl's ponytail to get her attention during volleyball. She cried. I reported it to Mrs. Henderson. She said girls can be overly emotional and that I was reading too much into normal coaching. Marcus looked up at me, his eyes filled with regret. There are 9 incidents documented here. I saw him put his hands on children inappropriately. 9 times I reported it. And 9 times I was told to mind my own business or reconsider my understanding of appropriate discipline. David photographed every page. This is exactly what we need. Are you prepared for what comes next? The school district will come after you. They'll try to discredit you, claim you have a grudge, that you're lying for attention. I know, Marcus said, but I'm ready. I've been a coward long enough. We filed the appeal the following week, citing newly discovered evidence that was not available during the original trial. Judge Thornton scheduled a hearing to determine whether the new evidence was substantial enough to warrant overturning the verdict, but we didn't wait for the legal system. David connected me with Rachel Kim, an investigative journalist from a national news network who specialized in institutional failures. Rachel had exposed corruption in school systems across the country. When I showed her Marcus Chan's documentation and the pattern of dismissed complaints, her eyes lit up. This is bigger than one teacher, she said. This is about a systemic failure to protect children. I want to run this story, but I need your permission. It's going to be intense. Your family will be thrust back into the spotlight. Are you ready for that? I thought about Ethan, about everything he'd already endured. Then I thought about all the other children who might be hurt if we stayed silent. Yes, I said. We're ready. Rachel's investigation aired on a Thursday evening and the segment was titled, Failed by the System, When Schools Protect Teachers Over Children. It featured our story, but also interviews with Rosa Mendoza, Kevin Travers, Jennifer Caldwell, and Marcus Chun. It showed the school's pattern of dismissing complaints, the documentation that proved administrators knew about Patterson's behavior and covered it up. The response was immediate and explosive. By Friday morning, #JusticeForEthan was trending on Twitter. Parents across the country started sharing their own stories of school systems failing to protect their children. The State Education Board announced an emergency investigation into Riverside Elementary's administrative practices. The superintendent was placed on leave pending the investigation. Mrs. Henderson, the principal who had dismissed so many complaints, resigned. And then, something unexpected happened. More victims came forward. Not just from Riverside Elementary, but from the 2 other schools where Patterson had worked before. People who had been children when he hurt them, now adults who had buried the trauma for years. They contacted Rachel. They contacted me. They contacted David. Each story was heartbreakingly similar: aggressive physical contact, administrators dismissing complaints, communities protecting the teacher over the child. One woman, now in her late 20s, told me through tears, I was in 2nd grade when Mr. Patterson taught at Lincoln Elementary. He grabbed me so hard during gym class that I had bruises for weeks. My parents complained, but the school said I was clumsy. I've spent 20 years thinking it was my fault, that I was too sensitive. Seeing your son's story made me realize it wasn't me, it was him. And they let him keep teaching. The State Education Board's investigation uncovered something stunning. Patterson had been quietly transferred between 3 different schools over his 20-year career. Each time complaints accumulated at one location, the district would move him to another school rather than address the pattern of behavior. They had literally recycled a problem teacher, allowing him access to new victims rather than protecting children. The public outrage was deafening. Parents organized protests. Teachers' unions released statements condemning the practice of transferring problematic educators. Education reform advocates used our case as an example of why stronger protections for students were necessary. The appeal hearing was scheduled for March 15, 3 months after the original verdict. This time, the courtroom atmosphere was completely different. Judge Thornton entered with an expression that showed she'd been following the news coverage and the state investigation. David presented Marcus Chun's testimony along with the documentation he'd provided. Marcus spoke clearly and calmly about what he'd witnessed, about the administrative cover-up, about being pressured to stay silent. Rebecca Morrison tried to attack his credibility, suggesting he was testifying out of bitterness about being forced to transfer, but her arguments felt hollow in light of everything that had been revealed. Even she seemed to know the tide had turned. Judge Thornton reviewed the new evidence carefully. Then she did something I'd never expected. She overturned the jury's verdict. This court finds that the newly presented evidence is both substantial and material, she announced. Evidence that the school administration had direct knowledge from a staff member about Mr. Patterson's pattern of inappropriate physical contact with students and deliberately concealed this information fundamentally changes the nature of this case. The original verdict was based on an incomplete picture of the facts. She looked directly at Patterson and the school district's attorney. What this documentation reveals is deeply disturbing. It shows a systemic failure to protect children, a deliberate choice to prioritize institutional reputation over students. While I cannot retry the criminal aspects of this case, I am ordering a new civil trial to be scheduled within 60 days, and I am recommending that the district attorney's office review this evidence for potential criminal charges related to obstruction and institutional negligence. She turned to me and Ethan, her stern expression softening slightly. Ethan, I want you to know that this court believes you. I'm sorry the system failed you the first time. That won't happen again. Ethan squeezed my hand. I saw tears in his eyes, but this time they were different tears. These were tears of relief, of validation, of finally being heard. Outside the courthouse, we were surrounded by supporters this time, not protesters. Parents held signs that read, "We believe Ethan and protect children first." Rachel Kim was there with her camera crew, documenting everything. "Sarah, how does it feel to have the verdict overturned?" she asked. I looked at Ethan, then at all the people who had come forward to share their stories, who had found courage because we refused to stay silent. "It feels like the beginning," I said. "The beginning of accountability. The beginning of change. The beginning of a system that might finally put children first." The new trial took place 2 months later. With all the evidence that had emerged, with Marcus Chone's testimony, with the state investigation's findings, the school district settled before the jury could deliberate. They admitted to institutional negligence, agreed to implement new oversight procedures, and paid damages that would fund Ethan's education and therapy for years to come. But more importantly, the case led to statewide reforms. Patterson's teaching license was permanently revoked. The district attorney filed charges against 3 administrators for obstruction of justice and child endangerment. 2 were convicted. The state legislature passed the Ethan Mitchell Child Protection Act, requiring mandatory independent investigations of any complaint involving physical contact between school staff and students, and creating a statewide database to track educators with substantiated complaints so they couldn't be shuffled between districts. It wasn't everything. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Ethan is 10 now. He still has nightmares sometimes. He still flinches when adults he doesn't know well reach for him quickly. Trauma doesn't disappear just because you win a legal case. But he also knows something powerful. He knows he was believed. He knows his mother fought for him. He knows his truth mattered. And beyond our family, hundreds of children are safer because we refuse to stay silent. Policies change. Laws change. Awareness change. That's not nothing, that's everything. So if you're reading this and you're facing your own battle against an institution that doesn't want to hear, against a system designed to protect itself, against people who call you a liar or a troublemaker, keep going. Document everything. Find your people. Tell your story. Don't let them silence you. The court ruled against my child, but in the end, truth won. Not icily, not perfectly, but it won. If this story touched you, please share it. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Your support means everything to families fighting for justice everywhere. Together, we can create the change our children deserve.